All right. Uh,
Which computer? It's going to be in your computer, Shazia, or his computer?
okay. It'll be on my computer, but I can share it out. It says it's recording now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So you just share later on once done.
Yes, we can. I'll be glad to do that.
Okay, I
Uh,
wanted to comment on something else if, until more people show up. There are new trends actually linked to your model more than to the blooms. For
Oh,
example,
okay.
yeah, yeah, the high impact learning strategies, and as in your model, the term significant learning experiences. So these
Ah,
terms
okay.
yeah, are now spread, but they don't refer directly to your model. What do you think the reason for that?
Uh, I'm not sure what the reason, but it's not a problem for me. As long as they get the ideas, that's the important part.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah. This, can you see the picture of a Hamza Abdul Ghani,
I
Dr.
can, yes.
Yes, this young man is one of the senior medical educators and specialized in assessment, but all aspects of medical education. Dr. Hamza, would you like to welcome Prof. Hamza?
Hi, Prof. Hamza.
I think he may be muted.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Prof. Hamza, ahlan wa sahlan to other participants. We are still waiting right now. I can see that all together we are eight. So I'm expecting that they will join exactly at 8.
Yeah, yeah. We will start exactly at 8 and they can join whenever they
Yeah.
are. Yeah. So it is now 8. Shazia, you can start introducing Dr. Fink.
All right.
Uh,
Uh, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear all SESMI members and participants, Assalamu alaikum and very warm welcome to this webinar arranged by Saudi Society for Medical Education Riyadh office. I'm Dr. Shazia Iqbal, chairperson and organizer for continued professional development activities at Saudi Society of Medical Education. Our society is very much keen to focus on new educational trends in medical education, and this is our second webinar to this series. Learning how to learn is an art, and not every teacher knows exactly. Recently, there are many merging unique concepts and new way of learning and teaching in higher education. For instance, there are new trends with notion of machine learning, project-based learning, experiential learning, gaming, nano learning, and a lot more. Purpose of today's Journal Club session is to focus that how faculty can improve their teaching skills, especially when we talk about designing the course instructions and enforce student-centered and self-directed learning. How can educators enhance the quality of teaching and interaction to engage students in learning process? And also we shall know about the significance of integration and human dimensions during teaching activities. The topic for presentation is the Fink's model of significant learning, and it's matter of great pleasure and honor to present very eminent speaker, Dr. D. Fink. Very warm welcome, Dr. D. Fink, to Sesame Rayan. Dr. D. Fink served as a director of instructional development program at University of Oklahoma for 26 years, from 1979 until his retirement in 2005. He was president of Board Network from 2004 to 2005, which is a professional and organizational development in higher education. It is a primary professional organization for faculty developers in United States. He is an author of book named as Creating Significant Learning Experiences, an integrated approach to designing college courses. So I hope that this will be a wonderful session and with Dr. D. And I shall be moderating this session. And for your question and answers, we have kept last 15 minutes. You can keep your questions with you, either raise hand by end of session, or you can put up your questions in chat box. I shall be keeping eyes and we shall answer by end of session. Before we start, I expect that if Dr. Khalid is around, if he would like to give some opening remarks, or on his behalf, if Dr. Al-Mardi want to say and give some opening remarks, and we can start.
Thank you very much, Shazia. On behalf of the chair of the Riyadh office, Professor Khalid Al Abdul Rahman, we welcome you, Dr. T, and we thank you so very much for your time. And without further ado, you can start your presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for inviting me and giving me the pleasure of visiting with people in Saudi Arabia. As I was mentioning earlier to Marty and Shazia, I've had the pleasure of visiting Saudi Arabia, I think it was 2 times before, over in Dammam. One of the universities there invited me to do some workshops. I also had a chance to do a workshop at the medical college that I think was in that area anyway. Sometimes when I'm traveling around, I don't always know where I'm going, where I'm at, but I was there, and the people were very hospitable, and my wife joined me on that second visit. We had a good time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. Is this share here? Okay, there we go. Well, first of all, I want to, let's see, I want to say greetings and welcome the people who are here. Let me ask a question, and let me just ask a show of hands. How many people here have heard of Benjamin Bloom and his famous taxonomy? I asked this before, and Shazia said she estimated approximately half. Just raise your hand, or put your hand up in the screen there, in the what participants, I guess it is. Roughly how many people we've got? Okay, several people. Well, I'm going to make reference to that, so it's just helpful to know how many people have that. Okay, thank you. The other thing you may or may not know, my book, which was published in 2003 and then updated in 2013, was in fact translated into Arabic some years ago. I don't know if people know about that, but here's the book. It was I think it's Obeikan, was the Obeikan. Yeah, was the publisher. I don't know if that's something people. Are you all from? Are Marty and Shazia? Or is this something you're familiar with or not?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if that was how you found out about it, but just so be aware, you can read. I know most of you can, or all of you can read English quite well, but if you wanted it in Arabic, just be aware that publication is available. What I'm going to focus on today are the 2 major themes in my book, and that I talk about in my workshops that I've done in various places. One of those is the first of those is just what is significant learning? What do I mean by significant learning? And what is it that is embodied in this taxonomy of significant learning that I related to that? But then we're going to move to the second question. And once we find out what significant learning is, and if we decide that is something good that we would like more of in our teaching, question, how do we create more of it through our teaching? Like I said, these are the 2 big themes in my book, but they're very, very closely related. In some ways, I would say significant learning, that concept of significant learning, for me, represents the goal of our teaching, or at least an appropriate, good, desirable goal. But once we have that, then this model of integrated course design that we look at is a tool for achieving. Okay.
انا فتحت على ما ثاني ابديت. انا فتحت على
May I request participants to please keep your mic mute.
بس عندك
Mr. Ottoman.
الحجز ولا ما عندك؟ اوه انا فتحت كاني بنزل توكلنا.
Please keep your mic
عملت
mute.
كده؟ اه
محمد عثمان يا محمد عثمان. محمد
انا بقول
عثمان.
لك انا فتحت كاني هنزله لقيت قال لي
Safa.
في ابديت.
Muhammad Ottoman. I just wonder why, where is he?
Okay, I will move on here. Okay, well, what are these taxonomies of learning? I put my concept of significant learning into this taxonomy. And a taxonomy of learning, anyway, is a set of distinct kinds of learning. Now, for a lot of people, the concept of kinds of learning is a novel one. We think of learning as learning, but that's not quite true. There are different kinds of it, and it is helpful to recognize what those different kinds are. This one that I referred to a moment ago, Bloom's taxonomy, was published in 1957 by a professor named Benjamin Bloom at the University of Chicago. And it was primarily in what he called the cognitive domains. It's different kinds of cognitive learning. And it looks something like this. It starts at I'm going to change my view just a little bit to help me. See, can I do that here? No, okay. Understand at the bottom, then comprehension, application, how to do something with it, analysis, identify the various parts of something, synthesis, finding the interaction between those different parts, and then finally at the top, evaluation, evaluating the quality or goodness of an idea, a thing, or whatever. And this taxonomy has been very helpful to professors for many decades because they can look at that and say, yes, I have to have some of those parts at the bottom, but I also want to strive or try to achieve, help my students achieve some of the kinds of learning of how to analyze, how to synthesize, how to evaluate, and so forth. And they hadn't thought of these kinds of learning before Bloom came along with this taxonomy. One, as I was sharing earlier with Dr. Akbal and Dr. El-Mardi, I had a course with Benjamin Bloom and became familiar with him when I started graduate school at Chicago in 1970. And like everybody else, I was very, very impressed with it. But later, starting with my graduate dissertation during the 70s, but then later in the 1990s, I started thinking about maybe there's some additional kinds of learning that are important besides the ones that are in Bloom's taxonomy. So I ended up, and I'll tell you how I created it, and that's significant in just a moment. But my taxonomy is similar to Bloom's in that both of it, his and mine, both have 6 kinds of learning in it. But it's also different in important ways. Now, the first is his was about cognitive learning. I said that mine is about significant learning. What do I mean by significant learning? Well, let me move to this. Here is one problem I've seen with a lot of learning, both of myself and some of the courses I've had especially as a college student, but I've seen it in other professors' courses as well. And I call it the problem of learning going in and coming out. And here's what I mean by that. Here's a little, here's the difference. Well, let me back up here. The problem I see is students learn some ideas, some information, but for a short while. They learn it long enough to take a test on it and try to pass it. But after they get past the test and move on, 6 months later, 1 year later, the knowledge isn't there. The memory of the understanding of the concepts and terms. So it's like information in, information out, or as somebody sort of said in a pejorative way, it's like we're trying to dump knowledge into our students. They hold on to it long enough to take the test, and then they dump it out. Okay, so dumping it in and dumping it out. And as long as that's going on, I think that's a big problem, because of my definition, what I think we should be having as our goal is learning that stays, that lasts, and more importantly, learning that changes the way students live their lives. If their learning doesn't change, doesn't get incorporated into the way they think about themselves and the way they live their lives, what's the point of the whole operation anyway? Now, there's different ways. Some learning may affect the way they live their personal life. Some of it will affect the way they live their social life. In medical education, most of it is aimed at their professional life, affecting the way they do that. But even medical school, sometimes that's going to change their civic life, what they try to do to enable better public health provisions into society in relation to life and medicine. And we see that around us right now today. I assume this, I don't know if this is true in Saudi Arabia. In the United States, there's a big struggle trying to convince people that it's a good idea to get the vaccinations. I know many of my friends are not doing it, and I try to persuade them, but that's connecting my medical beliefs anyway with my civic responsibilities and try it with my fellow citizen. But medicine, as you know, affects the way we live some parts of our civic life. But coming back to the big thing, what I think we want is just not learning that goes in and out, but that actually gets incorporated by students into the way they live their lives, their personal life, social, professional, or civic lives. Okay. Now, so if we decide that's the meaning I'm going to give to significant learning, and that's a good goal. How did I come up with this taxonomy, and how does that compare to the way Bloom created his taxonomy? Well, what Bloom did, and actually it wasn't just Bloom, his name got attached to it, it was him and some associates. They interviewed hundreds, I think, lots of many professors, but basically with one question. They asked these professors, what is it you really want your students to learn?
I'm really sorry. No, can you please mute your mic? I just wonder, in our setting, it is there that participants will be mute on entry, but I just wonder why they are still on.
Yeah, okay. Okay, what Bloom did was ask these professors, what is it you really want your students to learn? And his genius was in taking their hundreds of answers and analyzing down to basically 6 primary categories of learning, the ones that I showed you earlier: comprehension, analysis, application, so forth, okay? Interviewed professors asking what they really wanted students to learn. How did I create my taxonomy? Well, it was different. What I did was not interview professors, but I interviewed students, several hundred of them over the years, with a 2-part question. The first question was, I asked the students, have you ever taken a course where you learned something so important that it changed the way you lived your life, your personal, professional, social, or civic life, or whatever? And most students will say, well, most of my courses didn't do that, but yeah, I had 1 or 2 that I remember that did. Then I asked them the second question. In that course where you did learn something so valuable that it changed the way you lived your life, what was it you learned that had the power to do that for you? And then what I did was take their various answers, like Bloom, analyze them, and try to find the fundamental categories of kinds of learning that they were talking about. So that was one important difference between mine and Bloom. He asked professors a question, I asked students a question. Okay, and that led to one other important difference just to be aware of. When Bloom created his taxonomy, it was seen by him and by others as hierarchical. That is, you started at the bottom with those knowledge and comprehension categories, which were seen as lower order level thinking knowledge. And as you moved up, they called those the higher order thinking skills. Now, this was good in that it urged professors or teachers to strive towards doing something of which a lot of their teaching did not do, and get towards those higher order thinking skills. But mine was not hierarchical. When I looked at mine, I saw them as interactive. And here's the model that I created to show that interactive character. And those are the 6 categories. But let me just briefly explain to you what I mean by the interactive nature of this. Let's start with the application. If I learned how to use some knowledge, and that's what application means, then I will see reason to learn and study and memorize, if necessary, some of the foundational knowledge. If I care about something and get excited about it and came to believe it's important, that will help me, motivate me to learn how to do the application, maybe the integration of foundational knowledge. If I do all of those things, then I might go up to the top left-hand corner and say, wow, this is really important kind of knowledge. I want to learn more. So let me learn how to learn more. And the teacher helps them with that. But my basic belief is you really get the biggest bang, the most powerful impact of your learning when you get all 6 kinds of learning going together. When the more of these you can incorporate into your course, the easier it is for all of them to happen, because they support, each one of them supports students learning the other kinds of learning represented here. So that's the whole concept of the interactive nature of this model of significant learning. Now,
Can you please explain more the caring one?
Was that a question for me, or is that something else?
Can you explain more the caring after the application of knowledge?
Yes, I'm going to do that right now. Thank you for asking that. That's where I'm going next. I'm going to go around this diagram, starting at the top right-hand side with foundational knowledge. And let me, in fact, move to the second. This is my, to me, I call this the electron model, if you will, because a little bit like electrons circling around each other and creating a lot of power. But I also saw the need to create this, pie chart version like this, where I can show this next level of down. The foundational knowledge is where we just want students to understand and remember information and ideas, facts, principles, relationships, theories, data, etc. We want them to understand it, and we want them to remember it. But I called that the foundational knowledge because you really need that in order to go the rest of the way around the circle. So it's the foundation of the rest of it. Now that's very similar to Bloom's knowledge and comprehension. The next category, going around clockwise, is application. Here it's like Bloom's application. It's basically identical to that. But sometimes physical skills where you learn how to use some equipment, like in microbiology or something like that. But another idea that I borrowed from a professor who talked about 3 kinds of thinking: critical thinking, where you evaluate something; creative thinking, where you think of something new; and practical thinking, where you learn how to use something to solve a problem. Those are all parts of application, and then sometimes managing complex projects. Integration is where you connect things, ideas, bodies of knowledge, concepts, theories, whatever, connecting X, Y, or X, Y, and Z. Now, I didn't set out to do this, but after I had created this, I realized that these 3 kinds of learning on the right-hand side, as I refer to them in my diagram, are identical to the categories of knowledge in Bloom's taxonomy. All I've done is repackage his 6 categories into 3 categories. Integration is like his synthesis. The evaluation is an application, and so forth. But once we move to the left-hand side, we move into an area that Bloom did not refer to in his taxonomy in the cognitive domain. And this we have because these are what students told me had the power to change the way they live. So let me just go around that. Starting with the human dimension, students said sometimes a course was important because they learned something about themselves, who they are or who they want to be, their ego image, their self-image, or their ego ideal. In your case, you want your medical students to aspire to see themselves as physicians or pharmacists or whatever aspect of medical work you're talking about, but also to aspire to be good doctors and so forth. That was one part, learning about themselves. The other part, students sometimes says, I learned how to interact with others in a better way. Now, what do they mean by that? Sometimes the teacher was doing things that had students working in small groups, and they learned how to be an effective member of a team. That is really important in medical work. Or they learned how to be a leader. Or they learned how to relate more understandingly to people who are different from themselves, different by age, different by wealth, different by gender, different by nationality, different by whatever, okay, by race. Big problem in the United States. Learning how to understand and interact effectively with people generally, but especially people different from yourselves, is life-changing if you can learn how to do that. And there are things that people can do to do that. Now, moving to the next category, caring. Sometimes the students said, a course was valuable to me because for the first time, I became interested, excited about, or saw the value of something I never understood that way before at all. I got excited about astronomy. I got excited about plants or nature. I got excited about research, whatever it was. They developed feelings about it. They became interested in it. They saw the value of it. And all of that is developed in the idea of caring. And then finally, one that I came to believe was arguably, the most important of the whole set, and that is helping students learn how to continue learning after your course is over. Now, there are a variety of ways that can take on meaning. One is simply helping them learn how to become a better student, and there are people with whole books that are sharing some very valuable ideas about that, because if they can learn how to be a better student in your course, they can probably transfer those same ideas to how to be a better student in other courses. Sometimes it refers to about how to inquire about a subject. For example, the whole scientific method is learning about how to inquire about science. How do you formulate a good question? How do you gather data? How do you evaluate that data? How do you formulate an answer to a question? All of that helps, if you understand that, helps you continue learning more in the future about science, okay? Self-directing learners. This is one that I came to believe was really important. If we can help students become self-directing learners, that is, people who can direct their own learning, direct and manage their own learning in the future, no matter what it is, I think that's an extremely important thing for all people, for all time, but especially in this 21st century, because there's so much, the growth of knowledge is so rapid, people have to keep on learning, and knowing how to do that more efficiently and more effectively is a really, really important skill. So I think there's a lot of importance, and there are things we can do in our courses to help students learn how to continue learning generally, but especially about our subject after they finish taking our course. So that's the basic taxonomy of significant learning. That's what I mean about it. Like I said, Bloom, the right-hand side is basically Bloom repackaged, but the new part is the left-hand side. And that's where I see myself as basically standing on Benjamin Bloom's big shoulders, borrowing the whole idea of the taxonomy, keeping part of it, but looking a little further and seeing kinds of learning that most of us today, but especially once we see them, can look at those and say, wow, I would like students in my courses, in addition to the cognitive things, learn about the human dimension, develop some new kind of caring, and know how to keep on learning after the course is over. So that's what this taxonomy is intended to help people just identify these. Now, if you buy these ideas that these might be good kinds of learning to promote in your courses and in your program.
Dr. D, may I request you are host, if you can make mute to these participants who have unmute. You are host, I can't do.
Oh, I need to do that. Okay.
You are host, yes, please.
Sure. I'm sorry. They're going to participants. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, Gayat.
Let me see if I can come down here. Yeah. Okay, I think the rest of them are. Okay, we'll see if that works. Thank you. I forgot I had control of all this. All right. Now, if we can buy the idea that this is a good thing to be doing, how do we get that kind of stuff? Can we really, without more time, promote more kinds of learning in our courses without giving up some of the cognitive content-oriented learning that we're promoting right now? And the short answer to that is yes, you can. We know that now because people have tried this and done it. Okay. Now there's a couple answers to how you do it, but let me show you. Now we're going to start to the, let's see, here we go. The basic. How can you create more kinds of significant learning in your teaching? And here, let me give you a little introduction to this. The basic process, there are a number of things you can do, but the one I'm going to talk about here, which I think is probably 60 to 70% of the challenge we face. We have to learn how to design our courses. Now then after we design them, we have to teach them in an effective way. But that the whole process of teaching in a new and better way is with the course design process. Now, as I've looked at professors over the years design their courses, where they put them together, and what I'm referring to by the course design process is all the decisions we make about a course before day one of the course. There's a lot of decisions we make. Some of them we change as we go along, but the bulk of them, if we're doing it right, we make ahead of time. There are two ways, and one of them is going to be a good way, and one of them is going to be a bad way, of course, as you might imagine. Two ways of designing the courses. The traditional way, which I did when I first started teaching, because I was like everybody else, just trying to do what I saw other professors doing, was to focus on topics, the different topics in this subject matter. Okay, now it's a natural thing to do, but here's what I think that leads to. When you focus your course on topics and you start teaching, here's what students experience. First of all, you have topic number one. Teacher gives you a lot of information. You try to understand it, remember it. Then topic number two, understand it, remember it. Topic number three, understand it, remember it. Then you get a test on everything in topic 1, 2, and 3. Then you move on. A lot of information about topic 4, a lot of information about topic 5, 6, another test, and so forth. The danger of this, well, there's several things that are wrong with it, but the big thing is wrong is that this really sets students up for that knowledge in, knowledge out. High-powered short-term learning, memorize it for the test, then forget about it because you got all this new information coming in. Now that seems, what else can we do other than focus on topics? Well, the answer is to focus on learning, not the topics, but the learning. And what I think we want to do as teachers is strive to be learning-centered teaching, and that involves learning-centered course design, okay? And in learning-centered teaching and in learning-centered course design, the first question, and in some ways the most important question, is what do you want students to have learned by the end of the course? You answer that core question first, and then you ask, what would the students have to do in their learning activities and their assessment activities and their feedback they get to learn that, okay? And you will use that taxonomy of significant learning to help you answer that question. Now, and then what you're doing is what you want them to have learned by the end of the course, I'm going to call that is your desired learning outcomes. I'm going to use the short DLO, desired learning outcomes, to refer to that in the rest of my slides here. Now, what you do then is you take this taxonomy and ask yourself, go around the circle and ask yourself, what foundational knowledge do I want them to have? What application do I want them to have? What integration do I want them to learn about? And so forth and so forth, okay? Now, I'm going to give you some information about how this might pertain specifically to medical education. In the United States, there's a group called the ACGME, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. Some of you may know about it because I know they do international accreditation about it. But they, a few years ago, laid out these several categories of standards, the basic areas of learning that they thought students in medical education ought to be good at, achieve. What I looked at those, and some of my colleagues in medical schools here in the United States helped me learn about this, it looked like they were exactly parallel to the various dimensions of my taxonomy of significant learning. When they talked about medical knowledge, there are things they just wanted students to know, that was equivalent to foundational knowledge. When they talked about patient care, that was equivalent to application, learning how to take this knowledge and use it to diagnose and find remedies for patient problems, health problems. Systems-based practice, well, about how the systems integrate and work together, that's the integration part. They thought it was important for medical students to have good interpersonal and communication skills. That's part of the human dimension, that interacting with others. They also talked about practice-based learning and improvement and constant self-evaluation. That to me was very close to the learning about oneself. And then professional practice. And to me, that was how to keep on learning after medical school, which is very important in medical knowledge. Now, so that's to me evidence that this taxonomy of significant learning has already been recognized within the medical field as representing the range of important kinds of learning for all students in medical education. Now, what happens when you move that down to the level of the curriculum of an individual school of medicine? As it turns out, I worked closely with one medical in the United States in Dayton, Ohio, called it was the University of Wright State University in the School of Medicine there. And they got interested in this taxonomy, and I helped them build a set of desired learning outcomes. They called them educational objectives for their curriculum. Now, this was not for individual courses, but for their whole program there. And I'm going to show them to you. Here's what they are. And they went right through my categories, but they created bullets under each one that expanded. For example, under medical knowledge there, understand the fundamental concepts, terms, processes, so forth, understand determinants of health, evidence-based medicine. Under application, like the ACGME patient care, how to conduct good interviews, how to diagnose patient health problems, how to propose evidence treatments, okay? Integration, system-based practice, connecting the knowledge of patient. Well, you can read this. I'll just give you a few minutes, but and then they went on through these three. I'll give you a moment to read through those, but I think you can see, and though their descriptions of those bullet points should be meaningful to you. Now, if you ask yourself, would you like for the people graduating from your programs to achieve a high level of learning on each of these dimensions of learning, each of these kinds of learning? I would assume the answer is yes. Those are all good and they're all important, but I think they're not common, okay? And they won't be common until we learn how to build those kinds of learning both into our curriculum, but especially also important into our individual courses. Because what our students experiences is what happens in our courses, and that adds up to the curriculum. So if we want to move to a learning-centered course design, I created a model that called the model of integrated course design, which is basically a learning-centered way of designing our courses using that taxonomy. What I'm going to do now is walk you through that. I'm gonna, yeah, we're just about on time. We're gonna have it, by the way, I'm gonna try to finish in time to leave us with 15 minutes or so for you to ask questions about all this at the end. So you can be thinking about these as you get ready, we're ready to move to that. But if we look at that model of integrated course design, here are the key components of it. I'm going to show you the process next. But the key components here are these 4 or 5 items. You start at the bottom with an analysis of the situational factors. Now, what you're doing at this stage is gathering information and analyzing it. What's the key situation here? What kind of students, what background knowledge do they have related to the subject of this course? What are some constraints, the class size or the classroom? Are we in person or virtual like some of us are doing now? All those kind of factors that might affect how we design the course, how we put the course together. Then you use that information you gather about those situational factors, and the using are the 3 vertical areas there. to make your three big decisions represented by the three circles. And the first decision you have to make is the one at the top. What do you want students to have learned by the end of the course? That is your learning goals. Once you have gotten clear about that, then and then only are you in a position to then answer the questions about the teaching and learning activities. What will students have to do to learn about and achieve these learning goals? And then the next question is feedback and assessment. What will they have to do? What assessment activities can I give them and what feedback can I give them that will enable both them and me to know how well they are moving towards achieving those learning goals? Now, especially important in this diagram are the three sets of arrows, bidirectional arrows connecting those three circles. And that's what I mean by integrated. When what those arrows mean is all three circles have to reflect and support the other two. For example, if one of my learning goals is for students to think critically about medical problems, but I go down to my learning activities and all I do is lecture and say, give them information, give them information, give them information. And there's no opportunity for them to practice and get feedback on critical thinking skills. Then when I go to my feedback and assessment, I've got a problem. Do I include questions about critical thinking on my assessment activities, my exams? If I do, then my assessment will be connected to the learning goals, but it will not be connected to the learning goals because I didn't give them any practice in doing that. So that arrow that connects assessment with learning activities will be broken. Or if I say, no, I can't give them assessment on critical thinking because I didn't give them any opportunity to learn it. I didn't give them any practice and feedback. In that case, then I'll have a strong connection between assessment and learning, but the arrow between assessment and learning goals will be broken. So it's really important that you have all three of these reflect and support each other. Now that's the components. What's the process? And here we're going to go through a diagram here. That's the heart of the whole integrated course design model. The first thing you have to do is imagine some big, exciting, important kinds of learning that you want your students to achieve in a particular course. And I usually suggest that when you frame that as a sentence, you have one verb and one sentence. So it has to be like a big umbrella that incorporates and encompasses several other kinds. Then from that and you describe that with what I call your big dream. I want the students to come out of here really confident about their abilities to perform diagnosis on patients or whatever your course might be. And then you have a project, a final project that would tell you and the students how well they'd achieved that. That's steps 1 and 2. Then based on that, your big dream for student learning, you start to identify some desired learning outcomes. And I just laid out 6 of them. Imagine that you might use this taxonomy of significant learning, but you actually write statements saying, I want them to learn this kind of foundational knowledge, this kind of application, this kind of integration, and so forth. Then you take those learning outcomes and put them into a very important document. And I actually use a piece of paper for this. I call it the 3-column table. And the 3 columns are those 3 circles in those components a while ago, the learning outcomes, assessment activities, and learning activities. So you take the learning outcomes that you wrote in step number 3 and put them in that left-hand column of this 3-column table. Just lay them out in a row there. Then next step, you take each of those learning outcomes one at a time, and this is step number 5. Then for each one, you work horizontally across that table. For the foundational knowledge, you ask, how would I know if students had achieved the necessary foundational knowledge, and how would they learn it? For the application, how would I assess it? How would they learn it? For the integration, how would they assess it? How would they learn it? And so forth. And you want to make sure you have specific activities for each one of those. And the reason you have to do that each row, one row at a time, is that you'll find very quickly you need different kinds of assessment and different kinds of learning activities for each of the different kinds of learning. For example, foundational knowledge, a sufficient learning might be just reading the material in the textbook. But reading the material in a textbook is not a sufficient learning activity for the application. For application, they have to do it and get feedback on how well they're doing it. And you don't get that from just reading a book. And for integration, they have to learn how to make connections between X, Y, and Z. You can't do that by reading the book. You have to give them situations and so forth, say, what's the connection between these different things? But you work through the 3-column table. And that gives you the first level of integration. Your learning and assessment activities are integrated with your desired learning outcomes. Once you have done that, then you're ready for the next step. And that's to take not the learning outcomes, because they're not activities, but you take the next 2 columns, all those activities in those 2 columns of the 3-column table, and you put them into what I call the weekly schedule. So depending on what the time structure for your course is, and I just laid out an example here of a course that meets on Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 15 weeks. And for each, what you have to do then is take all of those learning activities from the 3-column table and put them into this weekly schedule somewhere. And the 2 rules are that all the activities in your 3-column table have to be in the weekly schedule someplace. Because if the activities aren't there, then you don't have the activities that are needed to support and promote the kinds of learning you say they want. That's rule number 1. They have to all be there. But second rule is it makes a lot of importance what you put first, what you put second, and what you put third. You have to pay a lot of attention to the sequence of those activities so that they build on each other. It's not just that topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, but you want them, now that I've learned this, I'm in a good position to learn that. And that once I've learned that, I'm in a good position to learn something else. So you want the whole course within the units and within the whole course to have this feeling for the students. I'm moving forward and I'm moving upward, higher levels of understanding, higher levels of ability, et cetera, et cetera. So, and if you do that, then the result should be that that exciting kind of learning that you imagined at the beginning of this whole process will in fact be achieved by your students. And why do you have some good confidence that it will be achieved? Because you've done a systematic process of identifying important kinds of learning, identifying the right learning and assessment activities for each of those, and you put them into a sequence that builds and makes sense and builds on each other. You do all of that, and a high percentage of your students will in fact achieve that exciting, important kind of learning that you imagined in the beginning of the course. So that's the model of integrated course design. Now, if you can learn how to do that, use that taxonomy to identify important kinds of learning. And if you can use that model of integrated course design, and I would add with some important things about teaching strategies in that weekly schedule thing there. If you can do all that, what are some of the effects and benefits that you should expect to be able to see? And I see 3, the big one is, I guess the preface here, the big one is going to allow you to be more intentional in your teaching. Why? Because what I was just saying, because you have ensured that you've got the right activity, you've got good learning outcomes, important ones, you've got the right activities, and you've got them sequenced properly. So you have what you need to achieve that learning. And that's one of the comments that people who've been to the workshops and done these, and read my book or whatever, that's where they say these ideas allowed them to be more intentional. Before they said, it's like I was doing stuff and I hoped something good would happen, but I never knew. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But now you can be more intentional. I want to do this. I want students to achieve this kind of learning. Therefore, if I do this, this, and this, a high percentage of students should be able to do that. Now, the benefits, I see 3 kinds of benefits that can come from this learning-centered teaching. For your students, it's going to be higher quality learning instead of just a bunch of lower level understand, remember long enough for the test. It's going to be important kinds of learning: application, integration, human dimension, caring, learning how to learn, and so forth. Longer lasting learning because it's integrated into their own selves. It's that significant learning. They can see the value of it. They have helped create it. It's going to last beyond the test. And what most professors find is when students see what they're learning and see the benefit of it, they get more engaged in it. They spend the energy working on learning it. You get students with what I call a high energy class, high levels of student engagement. But if you can get those kind of things happening for the students, your students, then what that does for you, and I've heard this from a lot of professors, teaching became fun again because they could see the light bulbs going off. They could see students get excited. They could see kinds of learning happening that they, the teacher, knew were really, really important. And then for your institution, if you can get a lot of your professors doing teaching in a learning centered way, you're going to get a reputation for graduating students that really have powerful kinds of learning. They're really capable, they're motivated, they're competent professionals in their field. And that's good for everybody. So I think this has a lot of benefits for everybody. What we call, somebody called a win-win situation. Good for the students, good for the teachers, good for the institution, good for society. Okay. So that's the presentation. We do have about 12 to 15 minutes here, 12 minutes maybe, for questions. So if you've got some questions, please raise your hand in the, I guess you do it in the participant section of your Zoom here. Dr. Iqbal is going to tell you to go ahead and articulate your question. I'll do my best to answer them. So go ahead.
Dr. D, for wonderful presentation. We have two questions right now hanging in chat box. Dr. Safa, she asked, probably that's a very basic question. What do you mean by assessment activity? As you mentioned that we have to match.
Are you telling me the question? I'm sorry, are you telling me the question?
So that's the question, yes. Dr.
Oh, okay,
Safa.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to them. Okay. Can you say that again? I wasn't listening.
Yeah, Dr. Safa, she asked very basic question, which is that what do you mean by assessment activity?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the only question she asked.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, give me a thought.
No, there are two more questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there are probably a wide range of kinds of activities that classify as good assessment activities. But basically, let me define it, and then we give some examples of types of activities. A good assessment activity is one that tells students and tells you how well they have learned or are learning a certain kind of learning. Okay. Now, the two kinds of activities that we generally think of is one, a written exam, and that's fine for certain kinds. For example, foundational knowledge, even the basic multiple choice test is by and large fine for that. But once you start moving down to, say, application, then you need case studies. You want to have students do something. Try to apply that, whatever applying it means for a particular subject matter. A third activity, I think, when you move to integration and human dimension, I think having students write essays. Write an essay on what do you see as the interaction between X, Y, and Z. So it's a writing exercise, but it's not a multiple choice thing. It's a what do you see here? When you move to caring, I think you have to use ungraded writing activities. Now, the other three, the multiple choice test, the application exercises, these essay about the interaction and so forth, you can grade those. But some of the human dimension and the caring, you have to ask them, how are you feeling about this? Is this exciting to you at all? And you want to hear their answers, but you must let them know that it's okay if they aren't getting excited. Because if otherwise, oh yeah, I'm excited, when they really aren't, okay? And you need to know whether they're getting excited or what sort of things are exciting and what things aren't exciting, but it's a reflective essay. And oftentimes I do that in the forms of journals or 1-minute papers. I don't know if that's a familiar concept there or not, but 1-minute papers. Now the learning how to learn, how to assess that, the last time I taught at the University of Oklahoma, I had a couple of courses for graduate students about college teaching. And I had a project where I had them create a plan for learning more in the future. And they created it one step at a time over several weeks of the course. But the assessment activity was a sort of a about 2-3 page essay on what they intended to learn and how they were going to learn it. Okay, so probably a 2-page essay would do that. But it was the result of the culmination of a series of activities that led up to the creation of this plan that was different for each student in the course. So those are the kinds of activities that I see as, different kinds of activities for different kinds of learning. Now, what you notice in that is I think assessment should be frequent, by which I mean daily, maybe at least weekly, maybe daily. You should be having the students do something by which they can see and you can see, and you give them feedback on how well they are doing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to grade everything. You can look at it and say, done, not done, good job, bad job. You don't have to grade it A, B, C, or 10 on a 10-point scale with a lot of precision. Sometimes they can give each other feedback, and sometimes it can even be done in groups activities, small groups. I'm a big believer in that, but let me hold on that. I hope that gives some sense of the variety. If before I close, I'm going to make a mention of a website where there's a lot of information about designing learning. And one of the documents on there is different ways of assessing different kinds of learning, kind of like what I just described, but in more detail. Let me hold out there and we get some more questions. Yeah.
Yes, there is another question that is there any correlation of significant learning model with Miller's pyramid of assessment?
Okay, can you say that again? I didn't quite understand all of it.
Is there any correlation with Miller's pyramid of assessment? So is there any correlation of this model?
What do you mean by a coordination of assessment?
Correlation.
Yeah, I know the word. I'm not sure what the coordination of assessment. I'm not sure what we mean when we say coordinating assessment.
Well,
it's a correlation.
It's correlation.
Correlation.
It's correlation.
Okay,
Miller's
correlation.
pyramid.
Okay, between what and what?
between this significant learning model and Miller's pyramid of assessment, assessing skills, different
okay.
competencies.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if this is what you mean or not. So you have to help me clarify if it isn't. I think it's not coordinated. It's not correlated. If by that you mean if you have good foundational knowledge, you will have good application, you will have good integration and so forth. You can be good in one and not good in the other to a degree. Now, for example, I don't believe your assessment of application will be good if you don't have good foundational knowledge. So that's where they sort of support and affect each other. But one could have a high level of human dimension and caring, and maybe not so good in application integration, perhaps. But intuitively, you would think the better any of them are, the better the others will be. So in that sense, there will be some coordination, but it's not hard and fast rule. There can be some that are weaker, some that are stronger, but they do support each other. In that sense, you would expect coordination. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Another question is that is learner-centered learning is the same as that of student-centered learning?
Oh yeah, learning-centered and student-centered. Those are very similar and they overlap, but they're not identical. And people prefer one or the other, and I'm okay with that. I happen to like learning-centered. A lot of people that I know and respect really prefer student-centered. The difference to me is that the student-centered is focused on the student, which would include what they learn, but includes some other things as well about how they're feeling about the course, about their self-image. Do they have some confidence as a person, as a learner that will affect their learning, and those kinds of things. Those are important, but for me, the ultimate goal of my activities as a teacher is to promote high quality learning for as many people as possible. So for me, my focus is always on the learning more than on with relationships to the student, but my primary focus is on the learning rather than on the student. But if somebody likes student-centered learning as their guiding concept, I'm perfectly okay with that, because that will connect very easily to the quality of their learning. So a relationship, but they're overlapping concepts, I think.
Yes,
Give a
I can
chance
see.
to Prof. Khalid and Prof.
Yes, Prof. Khalid bin Abdurrahman. Yes, please, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. Fink, for your informative presentation. I'm sure this is going to be very useful for faculty members, especially the application of your taxonomy on course design, and I think it's much more practical. I have just a comment about the individualization of learners. As you know, not all students are the same. Their learning styles,
True.
their motivation of learning, and my question is, how can we apply these principles when
Understood. Yeah.
when we put the variation of for instance, prior experience of students, their learning styles, and so on and so forth. This
Yeah.
is one thing. The other thing is, again, in most of the medical schools, they are still using the grading system, where most of the students, they put the exam as the primary and the ultimate priority in their learning. So they're focused, or they are much oriented to examination. Is there any way to adjust the learning or the significance of learning principles to fit with whatever the exam situation, whether it is pass or fail or even grading, so that we can find a solution of this problem that really facing a lot of medical schools? Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's a really important question. Let me ask just a little bit of clarification on that last part about the exam part. Is it the system where you are or in the country, either way, that the whole grade has to depend on one big final examination? Is that required, or is that up? Does the teacher have option about what he can make as the basis of the course grade?
Well, it's a grading system where you know, there is a midterm, a continuous exam, and the final exam. But students, they usually think about how to earn A plus, A,
right,
and they focus on the examination. If there is some areas of application which is really important for their future, they ignore it, because the exam mainly focused on the knowledge or whatever things. So they are much oriented to the exam because the grading system. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, let me take your first question first, and then the second question. Both are good ones. Yeah. Teachers have always faced this problem. When I was a beginning teacher many years ago, one of the challenges that face all these students look different. How do I teach in a way that they can help with all of them? And that is a challenge, and that's part of what the information you gather during that situational factors part of that, the components part I mentioned earlier. The two things that I've learned over the years that help me deal with that problem is to recognize that I, as a teacher, do not have to deal directly, indirectly, but not directly, with every one of the students and their unique characteristics. Okay. Now, the two tools, if you will, that have helped me deal with that more effectively indirectly, one is learning groups, small groups into classes. There's a thing called team-based learning that I strongly recommend you take a look at. There are books out about it and websites about it, and a national organization in the States with an annual conference about it. But in fact, it was developed, the guy who developed it is a good colleague of mine, because he impressed me so much with this team-based learning. But you divide your course, all the students, into groups of 5 or 6 or 7 people, at the beginning of the course. You leave them in that group for the whole semester, and then you give lots of activities. You have them read things beforehand, give them a test individually, give a test to the team, and both the individual test and the group team count as part of the course grade. And that's going to feed into your second question. Then you give them lots of application exercises to work on as a team. Okay, so if you had 100, if you have 25 students in your class, you might have 16. If you have 100, you're going to have probably 20 teams or more, and it works well either way. But what happens when those teams work together to learn the material and to learn how to apply it? They help each other at a very close level. Now they're not dealing with 50 people, they're dealing with 5 others. Okay, and they learn how to adjust their comments, and they help each other learn. And so all those individual differences get worked out within a small group thing where the students are all committed to helping each other, rather than me having to deal with 100 students or whatever, how many students I have in the whole class. So you're learning how to use small groups effectively, especially in this teaching strategy called team-based learning, is one way that helps with that. The second thing I've learned to do is ask students to individually write short reflection papers, to pull back from the learning the material and to reflect on the learning process and how they're reacting to it, how they feel about it, what they think about it, the connections they feel to their life and so forth, personal life, professional life, or whatever. And I ask them to write these things like every 2 weeks in a learning journal or something like that. It may be every couple of weeks, and then I read them. I don't grade them, but I always try to write some short comment about what they're writing made me think or made me feel. And it takes a little time, but it pays big, big dividends. That gets into the human dimension, the caring often, but all kinds of things. But having them work in small groups where they dialogue in groups, but having them write reflective papers where basically they're dialoguing with themselves and then dialoguing with me because I read it, nobody else, and then I give them feedback on it, helps me deal with a wide range of learning styles, motivations, etc. Now, let me move to your second one about the grading system. If your university allows you to construct your own grading system for an individual course, then I think you can solve the problem fairly well. But constructing the grading system for the course is a very important part of the course design process. I didn't get into that today, but I do in my book. And the system that I recommend, I mean, it works well for me and works for the people I've seen use it, is basically you set up something like 100 points or 200 points for the whole course. And if you get 180 points or more, you get an A. If you get 160 to 180, you get a B, or whatever, you know, the ranges are that you want. But the number of points becomes the determining of whether you get an A, B, or a high grade or a low, medium grade or a low grade. But then what you do is students earn points in many different ways, not just the final exam or the midterm exam. In my course, well, the last few times I taught, there was no final exam. There was a final project, which was very important and counted for a big part. But I didn't see any point for a final exam because I had lots of small exams about each of the major realms of learning I wanted them to do with the foundational knowledge and the application primarily as we went along. So I might have 5 or 6 or 7 small exams, and each one of those contributed points to the course grade. And so what the students realized very quickly was they had to put a good effort into all the different learning activities and assessment activities that we had along the way that added up to a good grade in the course. And if you use small groups, there are points that come to how well you contribute to the work of the group that add to those points for the whole course grade. That's a sort of separate topic. But basically, by having points that come from lots of activities, not just midterm and final, allows me to motivate students to focus on the learning activities and getting feedback and learning how to learn better than focusing on 1 or 2 big written exams. And to me, that gave me the kind of learning results that I was looking for. So I hope that helps. Okay, well, I think we may have gone over our 1 hour a little bit. I'm okay with that, but do we need to stop here, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, just few questions more. Yes, Prof. Hamza, can you please unmute and ask?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was really very much excited with the presentation of Professor Fink. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, brother. And it was really, and I mean, from very basic to the very advanced level, you have taken us within this very short period of 45 minutes. And this will be done only with the expert people in really teaching and learning. So thank you very much for that. A lot of answers has been given by Professor Khalid, provocative questions. I was again, just to stress that when we look for our goals and then our teaching activity and assessment. And at the end is the grading, as Professor Khalid was telling that. But very nicely, you have said that this grades, which is 100 or 200, to be what I like really, that assessment should be combined or coordinated or whatever it is you say, that with feedback. So when you put that the three things, the goal and teaching and learning and assessment was not standing alone, but assessment was standing with the feedback. The problem, as Professor Khalid already raised that, and I don't want to go in those details, that our student, if you say some activity with this without marks or without grading or without things, they will least bother about that. But when that if there is a like team-based learning that we're discussing about, if we have that questions and we say that you have 1 mark for each sessions to be answers and so on, so that will be the problem is the culture. I think our culture is so that they are so much what we call them that mark hunters. So if you give them 9.5 out of 10, they said where is the half you have to give? They don't say why it has been reduced, but where this you have to give. So they really come and make few problems with that. And I think it will take time to really change to that. But really I like that, and we all of us what the model you have presented, and your book is available really in Obey Khan. That's the things in Arabic as well as in English, it's available there. So it is really very nice to think not the topics, not the subjects.
About the learning.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Shukran. Shukran.
There is one more question by Dr. Khalid Al-Katan. He commented that one way to enhance these learning skills are to be done through extracurricular activities. So do you add?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture we given. You know, we adopted team-based learning quite a few years ago. And we have actually built also a student center sort of curriculum or learning center, as you said, the minor difference. But we also noted that engaging students in other what we call extracurricular activity, giving them a task, could be a community-based service or club activities, actually add to their skills in the learning process. So I just want to say that the team-based learning was a good, because we assess students during the team-based learning and we motivate them to go in. But also we noted that those who are involved in these other activities, they do very well when they go to the clinical phase, and they do very well when they are on practice. And the employers, when they're in the residency program, they note the difference when they are more heavily involved. And I think that should be also part of the equation when we put our, as you said, blueprint mapping, not just that this was taught, but also how it was taught, so that it served the purpose of that knowledge or that skill.
I appreciate those comments. I think the term what you're describing as extracurricular, like going out and doing some things in the community and so forth, is what I refer to as service learning how, providing some service to the community, using what you have learned or are learning in a course or in a program. But like you, I have found those kinds of activities extremely powerful, especially, well, on the right-hand side with the cognitive learning, but especially so on the left-hand side with this human dimension, understanding themselves, working with others, caring, and identifying reasons to keep on learning. it really helps promote that. But then what I also think is valuable to do, and I don't know if you may have already be doing this, is when you have something called service learning, to combine that with that reflective writing that I was talking about, and having reflect on, as they go along, but especially at the end of this, what did it go around the taxonomy? Did you learn some new knowledge or reinforce knowledge you already had?
Yeah.
Did you learn new skills? Did you learn how to see the interaction between the system and the individual patient? What did you learn about yourself, interacting with others? What new interest did you develop? And what does this do to your felt need for learning new things in the future? Let them reflect on that with understanding. They can say, I didn't learn anything about that, but I learned a lot about this. That's okay. But it allows them to give an honest assessment of themselves and allow you to see what their honest assessment is. And this
Yes,
is
what we do is similar. What we do actually is asking them to make it like a research,
okay.
and they have a conclusion
Yeah.
into that, so that the group will be writing their finding, their feedback, and we try to get them engaged into that, but correctly, self learning, and they should also try to write this.
And the other
Thank
thing
you.
I found neat to do with that, after they, when they're doing the service learning and when they're doing this self-reflection, then periodically, not every day, but every once in a while, have them to share what they're learning about themselves or others or whatever with others in their small group, because they will learn from others. Oh, you noticed that you learned that. I didn't think about that, but I had an experience that would have allowed me to learn that, but I just didn't think about it. So to me, that again, that having the right kind of experiences, the small group dialogue, and the reflection with themselves, those three things are really a powerful combination. It sounds like you've got all the elements of that. So I commend you for doing really good things. Glad to hear all these good practices already going on.
Yeah, if you allow me, just small thing is what we do, we start this with year one, but then make the same groups at year three, and sometimes the group of year three supervise the group of year one.
Yeah.
So there is a longitudinal learning process along their progress in years.
So you've got some development here, and their familiarity with each other and their readiness to talk honestly and openly, and you got some nice refinements going on here. So I commend you all. Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. D. I have only last question hanging in chat box, which is also related to your probably answered. So Helen, she asked that, can community-based learning also be included in learning-centered assessments?
Oh, yes. Well, yes, but maybe with two different ways. When you assess it, she may be talking about, do you assess the quality of the work in their community work? And you might want to do that, but probably not you as a professor, but have somebody who's on site, some supervisor looking at what they're doing and giving them feedback. Maybe, I wouldn't press that to be a level, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing too hard, but you might want to have a good, extraordinary, or could be improved, maybe sort of three loose categories there, but assuming that most people are going to be good or extraordinary. But the other kind of assessment, I would say, but it's a different kind of assessment, would begin have them that reflection on their community service, asking the students themselves to assess how well they think they are doing. And here's a reason that is really important to start asking, because normally we don't ask students, how good do you think you're doing? Because we just assume everybody will say, oh, I'm really, really, really good, okay? But here's the idea. What we want is when people go out and do something as a professional, who's going to be the first person who's going to evaluate the quality of the work? It's not going to be me. It's not going to be the professor. It's not even going to be their supervisor. Who's it going to be? Themselves. And I think most people have not developed a highly competent way of evaluating themselves. Now, what we have to do is give them practice in evaluating their own work, and then we give them feedback on their self-evaluation. We can do that. I have one funny story. I'll share this, try to do it real quickly, but I was talking about this with a colleague of mine in Lebanon one time at his home when he had me over for dinner. We were talking about this self-evaluation process. And his probably about a 14-year-old son was walking around the yard listening to us. He said, "Oh, my teacher's doing that." And I said to myself, this novel concept, this exciting new concept can't be already happening at the junior high in Lebanon. He said, "No, it is." I said, "Well, can you show me an example of it?" And he did. He brought a paper to us, and there was a project as teachers had the students do. I think it was in science. They did a project, but at the end of that project, the teacher gave the students a sheet of paper with about 8 questions on it that were like criteria for quality work on this project. And they asked the student to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5, I think it was. A 1 or 5, how well did you do? And there were 2 things that were interesting about it. One was the student did not give themselves a perfect score on all the criteria. On some, he said, "Yeah, I was pretty good on that." The other one, it could have been better. But then after the student filled that in, the teacher then filled in another column on each of those criteria, how well the teacher thought the student did on that. And when I looked at those 2 columns, what I discovered was the teacher agreed with the student on their evaluation. I think it was on 6 out of 8 of them. On 2 of them, the teacher thought he did better, and on 1 of them, the teacher thought he did worse than he thought. But what wonderful feedback, because here's why. When we get to that, well, here's what my experience has been. When we give students a class the chance to self-evaluate, the first time we do that, their self-evaluations are going to be all over the place, from too high to too low. But when we give them feedback on that, then the second time we do it, the range comes smaller. Most of them learn how to do it better. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th times, they're pretty accurate, okay, on self-evaluating. I know where I did well. I know where I could have done better, okay? And my argument is we need for all of our professionals to be highly competent in self-evaluation. And generally they are not, because we don't give them practice and feedback, practice and feedback. That's the way we get better at anything. So we have to give students practice and feedback on things they do all the way along. Not everything, but enough things where they can get better at it. And if they have lots of classes where the teachers are doing that, by the time they graduate from our program, they're going to be much more effective, which all of us need to be effective self-evaluators. And it's a skill we have to develop. So enough.
Yeah, Dr. D, Dr. Ikram, he has one question that in large class format, when student number is more than 100, how would you plan learning and assessment activities for higher level courses?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would do is use that team-based learning, because the bigger the class, the bigger the difference that team-based learning makes in terms of effective learning. It really does. And one of the good things about team-based learning is you still have to have multiple choice tests, but those are quick to grade, even with 100 students. Sometimes you can get a machine graded, or you can grade them quickly by hand if you have to. But the team things, you're not grading 100 plus students, you're grading 20 groups. And that's a lot easier and so it reduces the job. Then if you give them projects, and you get a grade for 20 teams, not 100 students. And so it makes your job a lot easier to use that team-based learning. Now, the other thing that's really important, if you use team-based learning, in the middle of the course, maybe, but for sure at the end, you have to give students the chance to evaluate everybody in their group as to how much that person contributed to the work of the group during the course. Because if sometimes everybody will contribute evenly, and then the assessment will show that. And then if it shows that, everybody gets equal grade for the work of the group. But if some people had to work harder to get that grade because other people worked less hard, there's a thing called peer evaluation where you do that and you create a number, and that has to reflect on how well the students did and contributed to the work of the group. But that's all that human dimension, other, learning how to work with others effectively in a group. But that has to then plug into the numbers for that. There's a system for doing that. I can share you if you need to. That has to plug into the grading system for a course. But I have taught courses with 75 plus students. It wasn't 100, but it was close. And when I used the team-based learning and the reflection where I said done or not done, or just high, medium, or lower, it was a doable job. The only time it took a lot of time was when I did that reflection and I read everybody's paper and wrote a comment. I had to spend 1 week reading those, but it was worth it. But I only did it once a month when I had lots of students. So that's the way I handle the grading and assessment with a large class. But it's doable.
Yeah. So what is your opinion on peer assessment in such a model where all students assess all other peers? The peer assessment model.
Yeah. What's the question about it? Peer assessment?
What is your opinion on peer assessment in such a model where all students assess all other peers?
I think it is already answered. It is already answered within this question.
Well,
thank you very much.
I would use it. Yeah. Actually, you have to use that. Just a quick comment. The reason you have to, if you use team-based learning, you have to have peer evaluation, peer assessment, because if the good students in there said, I worked hard to help this group achieve, but somebody else didn't, and they got the same grade as I did, that's not fair. Then they will not like that course, and they won't like the team-based learning, they won't like teamwork. And they're right, it isn't fair. So you have to have, if you give credit for group work as part of the course grade, you have to have a peer assessment. Sometimes everybody be equal, but if there's differentiation, you must know that, and it must go into the grading system.
Thank you, Dr. Fink. Actually, at Al Faisal University, Alhamdulillah, we are using all this complete model while we are doing TBL with 300 class, where we have divided the class into 5 to 7 student batches, and then we are doing the IRATs and then the group model for the SAQ type of questions, where the explanation are done, and then we are doing the peer assessment also. So I wanted to again have a comprehensive feedback from you on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Dr. Abdul Monem, if you have any comments, please.
No, we already kept him for too long. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Fink, for a wonderful presentation. I actually wanted you to answer my earlier question. Remember, I asked you, what do you think? Have you analyzed the reason for you published your book in 2003 and the new edition in 2013, but still the model is not talked about in education conferences. Have you analyzed what could the reason be?
Well, I like to see it gathering steam, as we might think about it. I think it's still gathering steam. I'll share with you. About maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was invited to give a session like this to a group of educators in India. Today, I'm doing one to Saudi Arabia. I looked at my email this morning, and I had an invitation to do a 2-day workshop at a university in Norway, where I visited a few years ago, but they wanted to follow up in the College of Pharmacy to look at their curriculum. So I think, and the other thing that happened, I think it's gaining steam internationally. And I think it's gathering steam in the US, but a little more slowly than Bloom did. His went very quickly. By the time I went to grad school at Chicago, 13 years after he published that, everybody knew about it. Mine is not quite that fast, but I think it is gathering steam. When I started consulting, when I resigned from the University of Oklahoma in 2005, it was because I was getting lots of requests to do workshops around the US. And so I decided to do that. But in the following 15 years, I looked at it later on, and I have done workshops in every region of the world: Africa, East Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Europe, South America, of course, North America. And I'm delighted at that. And like I say, the invitations are still coming in from different parts of the world. So I'm okay with that. It'll take some time, but as people use it and find the benefit of use it, they will talk about it with others, just as you are doing here. And it will spread. It will spread as people see the value.
Well,
Slow but sure.
Slow but sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Dr. Professor Khalid, if you would like to give a final word.
yeah, Prof. Khalid, if you would give some final closing comments.
Well, I think being a faculty member in medical school, I think it is our responsibility to take care of our students. And I think the principle that Dr. Finks just explained, and he's struggling to spread this principle, it's a part of our duties as faculty members. So like other, I mean, professions, we need to think about strategies that help our students to learn in a better environment. The problem nowadays is most of our students, they are still, I mean, learning medicine in a bit stressful environment.
Yeah.
I think the challenges that we are facing, how can we prepare our younger generation to learn medicine in a very enjoyable and in very friendly environment, so that they can catch up the things and the challenges of the future, not the day, because we want them to spare their power for the future. Thank you again, Dr. Frank.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Let me just show my final slide here. I'm going to give you two resources available for you. There is a website, some of you may already know this, called designlearning.org, that has lots of resources on it, and still I'm not changing it a lot. So it's not, doesn't look like it's maintained, and it isn't changed, but people are still finding it very valuable. There's just documents and examples and essays on there. The other is just, I will share with you my email. If you have follow-up questions about how to do some of this, I'd be glad to answer them as fast as I can at my retired state of operation these days, but I'd be glad to do that. So again, thank you. And I want to thank Dr. Almardi and Dr. Iqbal for their help, but also especially all of you. This has been a fun hour and a half to dialogue and conversation with you all. It's been very enjoyable for me. So thank all of you for this.
Thank you very much, Dr. D. And it really gave all of us insight that how we can make our learning and teaching more student-centered and more interactive. So I hope we shall continue our collaboration in upcoming session as well. It was wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
So we can say goodbye to all participants. I would request all participants to fill this feedback form, which I have shared Google survey form in this chat box. Please provide us with feedback. And Dr. D, I would request if you can share a recording of this because you were host and you recorded the session. So just share with us, and I would say goodbye then.